The safe door swung open with a whisper that shattered 15 years of silence, and Malcolm Hendricks, billionaire, tyrant, architect of humiliation, watched $200 million slip through his fingers because he'd never bothered to learn the name of his maid's son. Before you hear how Terrence cracks that impossible safe, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what happens next will have you cheating just to see the ending. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. The morning light cut through Malcolm Hendricks' penthouse office like judgment, through excuses, all sharp angles, and no mercy. 63 years old, and he still woke up angry. Angry at the city for not bowing low enough, angry at his competitors for still breathing, angry at the universe for having the audacity to contain people who weren't him. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a man who'd confused wealth with worth so long ago that the difference had fossilized. He adjusted his tie, Italian silk, the color of fresh bruises, and ran his fingers along the edge of his desk. Mahogany. Imported. A tree older than most countries had died, so Malcolm could rest his elbows in comfort. On the wall behind him hung his degrees. Wharton, Harvard Business School, a dozen honorary doctorates from universities that valued his checkbook more than his character. And there, squatting in the corner like a faithful dog made of titanium and contempt, sat the safe. The Kronberg X7. Swedish engineering at its finest. $500,000 of impenetrable arrogance wrapped in brush metal that caught the light and threw it back like a challenge. Malcolm had bought it 3 years ago, not because he needed it, but because the salesman had made the mistake of saying most clients couldn't afford the top-of-the-line model. Malcolm had purchased it the way other men bought sports cars, to prove something to an audience that wasn't watching. Inside that safe sat $200 million in bearer bonds. Untraceable. Liquid. The kind of money that didn't ask questions and didn't answer to governments. Malcolm kept it there because banks were for people who needed institutions, and Malcolm Hendricks needed nothing except the daily confirmation that he was better than everyone else. 30 million possible combinations, he told the installation team, watching them sweat through their polo shirts as they bolted it to the reinforced floor. The engineers said it would take God himself a coffee break to crack this thing. The lead technician had nodded, mopping his forehead. Yes, sir. The X7 uses a proprietary algorithm that generates a new encryption key every 72 hours. Even if someone had the manufacturer's codes, they'd be useless after 3 days. It's the most secure private safe in the Western Hemisphere. Malcolm had smiled then, the same smile a child makes pulling wings off flies. Perfect. I'd hate for it to be too easy. That was 3 years ago. Since then, the safe had become part of his performance, his theater of superiority. Dinner parties, networking brunches, private meetings with men whose handshakes felt like holding dead fish. Malcolm would gesture to the safe the way a magician draws attention to his best trick, and he'd make the same offer every time. Open it, and $200 million is yours. No strings attached. People would laugh. They'd make half-hearted jokes about hiring safe-cracking teams or using dynamite. Malcolm would watch their eyes, the quick calculations, the momentary flicker of genuine consideration before reality settled back in like fog over water. The safe was impossible. Malcolm was untouchable. The world made sense. Except this morning, the world was about to get complicated. Mr. Hendricks, your 10 o'clock is here. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, professionally neutral in that way expensive private schools taught you to hide contempt. Send them up. And tell Diane I want fresh coffee. The last pot tasted like she brewed it with tap water and broken dreams. Yes, sir. Diane Foster had worked for Malcolm for 15 years, which in his mind made her part of the furniture, functional, unremarkable, and easily replaced if she ever stopped being useful. He didn't know her last name, didn't know she had a son, didn't know that her husband had died 7 years ago from a heart that gave out under the weight of double shifts and deferred medical care. Malcolm knew only that she appeared when summoned, disappeared when dismissed, and had hands that made his imported coffee exactly the way he liked it. She arrived 6 minutes later, moving through his office like smoke, present but insubstantial, there but not really. Diane was 52, though life had added extra years to her face the way interest compounds on debt nobody asked for. Her uniform was immaculate, pressed and starched until it could stand up on its own. She learned early that men like Malcolm noticed wrinkles in fabric, but never in skin, especially not on black women who cleaned their toilets. "Your coffee, sir." Her voice was quiet, trained into submission by a decade and a half of being corrected for speaking too loudly, too softly, too much, too little. Malcolm didn't look up from his phone. "It's cold." It wasn't. Steam rose from the cup in visible curls. "I'll bring another, sir." "See that you do." "And Diane, when you serve the brunch guest today, try to be less visible. You have a way of hovering that makes people uncomfortable." Something flickered behind her eyes. A match struck in a dark room, quick and bright, and immediately extinguished. "Yes, sir." She left. Malcolm had already forgotten the interaction. By 11:30, his penthouse was filled with the kind of people who described themselves as philanthropists despite never having felt the sting of genuine charity. 8 men and 4 women, all white, all wealthy, all wearing watches that cost more than Diane's annual salary. They perched on Malcolm's Italian leather furniture like well-dressed vultures, drinking champagne that had traveled farther than most of them had ever ventured outside their comfort zones. Malcolm held court from his position by the window, backlit by the city he owned piece by piece. "The market's adjusting," he was saying, swirling scotch in a crystal glass that had once belonged to a Russian oligarch who'd made the mistake of defaulting on a loan. "But adjustments are just opportunities wearing a mask. You've got to be smart enough to rip the mask off." Appreciative murmurs. A smattering of laughter. These people weren't his friends. Malcolm didn't have friends, just assets with varying rates of return. But they were useful. Connections. Networks. The kind of people who could make problems disappear with a phone call and an offshore transfer. Diane moved through them like a shadow, offering mimosas from a silver tray that reflected a version of her face she no longer recognized. She'd been doing this for so long that she'd perfected the art of invisibility, of being present but not seen, helpful but not human. "You see that safe?" Malcolm's voice cut through the ambient conversation like a knife through expensive cheese. "Here we go," Diane thought. The performance. Same show, different audience. Everyone turned. Malcolm gestured toward the Kronberg X7 with the pride of a parent introducing their favorite child, the one who'd never disappointed them by developing empathy. "Open it, and $200 million is yours. Cash equivalent. No strings attached." The guest responded on cue. Laughter. Incredulous questions. Someone made a joke about hiring a team of hackers. A woman in a pantsuit that cost more than a used car asked if he was serious. "Completely serious," Malcolm said, grinning now. "But it's mathematically impossible. 30 million combinations. The engineers who built it told me I was wasting my money on the top-tier security package because nobody would ever crack it anyway. I told them I wasn't paying for security, I was paying for certainty." More laughter. Diane refilled glasses, invisible and essential, like oxygen. That's when Malcolm's eyes landed on her. It happened the way car accidents happen. You see it coming, you know it's going to hurt, but you're powerless to stop it. Malcolm's gaze fixed on Diane with the sudden intensity of a predator remembering prey exists. "Diane." Perfect timing. She froze. The tray in her hands suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. "You've worked here, what, 100 years?" 15, sir." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Exactly. A century. You've stared at that safe for all that time. Ever wonder what's inside?" He was playing to the crowd now, feeding off their attention like a plant feeds off sunlight. "You've got a son, don't you? I remember someone mentioning that." Diane's heart dropped into her stomach. "Yes, sir." "What's he do?" "I'm curious." The room had gone quiet. Not the comfortable silence of people at ease, but the thick, suffocating quiet of witnesses to something uncomfortable, unsure whether to intervene or simply remember it for later gossip. "He does computer work, sir. Freelance coding." Malcolm's eyebrows shot up in theatrical surprise. "Computers? A technical mind. Didn't he go to some fancy school? I feel like you mentioned that once." She hadn't. Diane never talked about her personal life at work. had learned that sharing pieces of yourself with people like Malcolm was like feeding pigeons. They just keep coming back for more and shitting on you for your trouble. He attended MIT for 2 years, sir. MIT. Malcolm turned to his guests, arms spread like a ringmaster announcing the next act. Ivy League intelligence in my service hallway. And he dropped out. The tuition, Diane started, then stopped. Explaining poverty to the wealthy was like describing color to the blind. Theoretically possible, practically pointless. The tuition was too much, Malcolm finished for her, nodding sagely as if he understood economics beyond his own accumulation. Shame. All that potential, wasted. But here's an idea. Bring him up here. Let's see if poverty breeds ingenuity or just excuses. If he can open my safe, he walks away with $200 million. If he can't, well, at least we'll all have a story. The cruelty was casual, delivered with the same tone Malcolm used to order lunch. That was the thing about men like him. They didn't need to shout or threaten. Their violence was atmospheric, built into the structure of every interaction. Diane felt her throat close. Mr. Hendricks, that won't be necessary. I'm sure he wouldn't want to. Oh, I insist. His smile was all teeth, white and sharp and expensive. Consider it a performance review. You're always so quiet, Diane. So invisible. I'd love to meet the son of a woman who's mastered the art of being professionally non-existent. Who knows? Maybe brilliance skips a generation. The words hung in the air like smoke from a building nobody had bothered to evacuate. Diane looked at the faces around her. Discomfort, embarrassment, but no intervention. These people would go home and tell their partners about the awkward moment at Malcolm's brunch, would shake their heads and say, that's just Malcolm being Malcolm, would write checks to racial justice nonprofits while doing absolutely nothing to stop the small, daily cruelties that held the whole rotten system together. Oh, I'll see if he's available, sir. Wonderful. We'll wait. This should be entertaining. Diane left the room with the careful dignity of someone who'd had a lifetime of practice swallowing humiliation without choking on it. She took the service elevator down 3 floors to the building's back hallway, where staff were allowed to exist. Out of sight, out of mind, close enough to serve, but not so close as to remind the wealthy that service required servants. Terrence was there, sitting on a bench that the building's management had installed sometime in the 90s and never bothered to replace. 23 years old, all long limbs and careful posture, reading a book with the intense focus of someone who'd learned that knowledge was the only currency poverty couldn't devalue. He looked up when his mother approached, and his smile, bright and genuine and completely unaware of what was coming, broke her heart in 17 places. Hey, Mama. Almost done for the day. Diane sat down beside him, suddenly exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Baby, I need you to do something for me. And I'm so sorry. His smile faded. What's wrong? She told him, watched his expression move from confusion to understanding to something harder, something that looked like his father when the world had pushed him one step too far and he decided to push back. He wants to humiliate you, Terrence said quietly. It wasn't a question. He wants to humiliate both of us. But baby, I can't lose this job. The insurance, the rent, everything depends on. I know. Terrence closed his book, stood up. It's okay, Mama. I'll go up there. I'll play his game. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much, too young. Because if I don't, he'll make your life hell. Men like him always do. They can't stand the idea of anyone having dignity they didn't grant permission for. They rode the elevator up in silence. Diane watched the floor numbers tick higher and felt like she was escorting her son to his execution. Slow, public, and designed to teach everyone else a lesson about knowing their place. The penthouse doors opened. Malcolm's voice drifted out, mid-anecdote, performing for his audience. Told the CEO that if he wanted my investment, he needed to fire half his staff and outsource to Bangladesh. He acted like I was asking for his firstborn. Profitability requires sacrifice, but these bleeding hearts never. Ah, there he is, MIT's finest. Terrence stepped into the room. 12 sets of eyes swiveled toward him like security cameras detecting movement. He was tall, 6'2", inherited from a father he barely remembered, and carried himself with the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned that existing while black and white spaces required a specific choreography. Too confident, and you were threatening. Too meek, and you were confirming their assumptions. The narrow path between was exhausting to walk. "Mr. Hendricks," he said, his voice even. The prodigy himself. Malcolm was in full performance mode now, feeding off the discomfort in the room like a plant photosynthesizing awkwardness. Come in, come in. Don't be shy. We're all friends here." They weren't. Everyone knew it. But the lie was part of the performance. Terrence walked toward the safe. It squatted in the corner like a metal toad, arrogant and immovable. He'd seen it before on the rare occasions his mother had let him wait in the office instead of the service hallway. Had never paid it much attention beyond noting it was expensive and probably compensating for something. "Here's the deal," Malcolm said, circling Terrence like a shark who'd smelled blood and had time to kill. "That safe contains $200 million in bearer bonds. Open it and it's yours. You've got, let's say, 60 seconds. Plenty of time for a technical genius, right? Or at least someone who spent 2 years at MIT before flunking out." "I didn't flunk out," Terrence said quietly. "I left because my father died and my mother needed help with the bills." The correction hung in the air. Malcolm's smile flickered, irritated at having his narrative disrupted. "Semantics. Point is, you're here now instead of graduating, so something went wrong. But go ahead, prove me wrong. Show us what affirmative action and participation trophies bought America." 60 seconds starts now. The guests shifted. A woman in pearls looked at her phone. A man by the window suddenly found the skyline fascinating. Nobody spoke up. Nobody said this is too far, or maybe we should stop, because stopping would require acknowledging what was happening, and acknowledging would require action, and action would cost them their comfortable position in Malcolm's social sphere. Terrence stared at the safe, then at his mother, standing by the wall with her serving tray. Her face carefully blank in that way she'd perfected over 15 years of professional invisibility. 45 seconds. The Kronberg X7. Swedish. Top of the line. He remembered reading about it in a cybersecurity forum months ago. Someone had posted about the manufacturer's diagnostic protocols, how the high-end models broadcasted encrypted system data for remote maintenance. The post had devolved into an argument about whether that was a security feature or a vulnerability, and Terrence had moved on to other threads, other rabbit holes of information he collected the way some people collected stamps. 30 seconds. He looked closer. There, top corner of the safe, barely visible. A small digital display panel cycling through system diagnostics. Temperature, humidity, lock status. And every 90 seconds, for exactly 3 seconds, the manufacturer's remote service code. He pulled out his phone. 20 seconds, son. Though I suppose you're used to failure at this point. Probably feels like home, doesn't it? Terrence ignored him. His fingers moved across his phone screen, pulling up the forum post he'd half remembered, finding the thread about Kronberg service protocols. There, someone had posted the decryption algorithm, arguing it was publicly available information that the company should have protected better. 10 seconds. He entered the code sequence. The safe's display flickered. 5 seconds. Malcolm was smiling now, already preparing his victory speech, his closing argument about why poverty was a personal failure and wealth a moral virtue. The safe's lock disengaged with a pneumatic hiss that cut through the room like a guillotine through excuses. The door swung open. Inside, stacked in neat rows like the corpse of someone's morality, sat $200 million in bearer bonds. Real. Accessible. Suddenly very much in play. The room went silent. Not the awkward silence from before, but a total absence of sound, like the universe had inhaled and forgotten to breathe out. Malcolm's face underwent a transformation that would have been funny if it weren't so viscerally satisfying to watch. Confusion, disbelief, denial, anger, all cycling through in the span of 3 seconds, his expression like a slot machine that had just come up all cherries for someone else. How did you? That's not. The engineer said it was impossible. Terrence looked at him with eyes that held 15 years of watching his mother disappear into herself, 15 years of swallowed dignity and professional humiliation. They probably thought like you do, sir, he said quietly, and his voice was steady as a headstone. That complicated means secure. That expensive means unbeatable. That if something costs enough, it must be worth it. He glanced at his mother. She was staring at him with an expression he'd never seen before, pride and terror, and something like hope all mixed together into something that might combust if you lit a match near it. That invisible means powerless, Terrence finished. Malcolm's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked like a fish drowning in air. You cheated. There's no way you could have. That's proprietary technology, encrypted. It's a manufacturer's diagnostic code that broadcasts every 90 seconds for authorized service technicians, Terrence said. The decryption algorithm is available on public forums. Has been for 2 years. Your engineers probably didn't mention it because you paid them to tell you the safe was perfect, and people tend to hear what they've already paid for. One of the guests, a man in a suit that probably cost more than Terrence's entire education, laughed. A short, sharp bark of genuine amusement that he immediately tried to swallow. It was too late. The spell was broken. Malcolm's face went red, then purple, like a sunset designed by someone who'd never understood subtlety. You can't just, that money isn't actually yours, you understand that, right? It was a hypothetical challenge, not a legally binding. You said, and I quote, open it and $200 million is yours. No strings attached. Terrence looked around the room. Witnesses, 11 heads, nodded slowly. The woman in pearls was recording on her phone, Terrence noticed. The man by the window was smiling now, apparently delighted by the sudden chaos. Malcolm's hands were shaking. I'll sue. I'll destroy you. You think you can embarrass me in my own home, in front of my guests. I think I just want a challenge you issued in front of a dozen witnesses, several of whom are recording. Terrence's voice never rose, never hardened. He delivered each word the way a surgeon makes incisions, carefully, precisely, with full knowledge of where the vital organs are. I think you made an offer assuming I'd fail because in your world, people who look like me don't succeed unless someone's lowering the bar. I think you wanted to humiliate my mother for entertainment, and now you're angry that the show didn't go the way you scripted it. Diane was crying, silent tears running down her face, her hands still holding the serving tray, her body frozen between her old life and whatever was about to happen next. Malcolm looked around the room, searching for allies and finding only spectators. Everyone out. Get out. This brunch is over. They left, slowly at first, then faster, like guests leaving a party where someone had just vomited on the cake. The woman in pearls paused at the door, looked back at Terrence, and mouthed what might have been good luck or call a lawyer before disappearing. Then it was just the three of them. Malcolm, Terrence, Diane, and $200 million sitting in an open safe, suddenly belonging to a 23-year-old who'd learned to pay attention in a world designed to ignore him. Malcolm's voice came out quiet now. Dangerous. You have no idea what you've just done. Terrence looked at his mother, then back at Malcolm. I think I do, sir. I think I've done exactly what you asked me to. He held Malcolm's gaze until the older man looked away first. Come on, Mama, Terrence said softly. Let's go home. Diane set down the serving tray, carefully, like it was made of something fragile. Then she walked to her son, took his hand, and together they left the penthouse, leaving Malcolm Hendricks standing alone in his glass tower, surrounded by the wreckage of his own arrogance and the open safe that had just taught him a lesson he'd never wanted to learn. That sometimes the invisible are simply waiting for you to blink. The elevator descended in silence thick enough to choke on. Diane still held Terrence's hand, something she hadn't done since he was 7 and they'd crossed busy streets together. Her grip tight with the particular fear mothers carry when they know the world is dangerous and their children haven't learned to flinch yet. Her palm was sweating. Terrence could feel it, the dampness of panic and disbelief mixing into something that felt like the beginning of tears she hadn't given permission to fall. Mama, he said softly. It's okay. She shook her head. Didn't speak. Couldn't maybe. The elevator numbers ticked down. 34th floor, 33rd, 32nd, and with each descending digit, Reality settled in like sediment in disturbed water. The doors opened on the ground floor. The lobby was all marble and money, the kind of space designed to make working people feel small. A security guard glanced up from his desk, registered their presence with the dismissive efficiency of someone trained to categorize humans into matters and doesn't matter, then returned to his phone. They stepped outside into October air that tasted like exhaust and coming winter. The city moved around them, taxis honking, pedestrians flowing past like blood through arteries, the ambient chaos of people convinced their destinations mattered. None of them knew that the world had just shifted on its axis. None of them cared. Diane stopped walking, just froze on the sidewalk like a machine that had suddenly lost power. Terrence turned to look at her, and what he saw in her face made his chest tight. Terror. Pure, crystallized terror. "He's going to kill me," she whispered. "Terrence, what did we just do? What did you just... He's going to fire me. He's going to make sure I never work again. He's going to... Mama." Terrence put his hands on her shoulders, grounding her. "Listen to me." He made an offer in front of witnesses. Multiple witnesses. At least 3 of them were recording. He can't take it back without destroying his own reputation. "You don't know him." Her voice cracked. "You don't know what men like that are capable of when you make them look small. He doesn't care about witnesses or recordings or legal contracts. He cares about winning. Always. And we just made him lose." She wasn't wrong. Terrence knew that. Had known at the moment the safe opened. The moment Malcolm's face had transformed from smug certainty into something uglier. Men who built empires on ego didn't react well to public humiliation. They reacted with lawyers and leverage and the kind of slow, grinding retaliation that looked legal on paper but destroyed lives in practice. "Then we get ahead of it," Terrence said. "We contact a lawyer. We make sure." "With what money?" Diane's laugh was sharp, broken. "Baby, we can barely afford the rent. You think we can fight a billionaire in court? He'll bury us in motions and continuances until we're homeless and begging." A taxi blared its horn. Someone shouted about a parking spot. The city continued its indifferent dance. Terrence's mind raced through scenarios, possibilities, the chess game that had just begun whether they wanted to play or not. Malcolm would retaliate, that was certain. The only question was how, and how quickly, and whether they could survive it. "We document everything," he said finally. "Every interaction, every threat. We build a case that if he comes after us, it's obvious retaliation. And we hope that his pride, the same pride that made him issue the challenge in the first place, won't let him publicly admit that I beat him." Diane looked at her son with eyes that had seen too much of the world's cruelty to trust hope. "You really think it's going to be that simple?" "No," Terrence admitted. "I think it's going to be a nightmare." "But Mama, you've been swallowing his humiliation for 15 years. Maybe it's time he choked on his own." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite hope. Hope was still too dangerous, but something adjacent to it. The faint outline of what dignity might look like if it ever came back. "When did you get so brave?" she asked quietly. "I learned from you," Terrence said. "You've been brave every day of your life. You just called it survival instead." She squeezed his hand, nodded. Okay. We go home. We think. We figure this out." They took the subway, couldn't afford a taxi, and the irony of potentially being worth $200 million while counting change for a Metro card wasn't lost on either of them. The train rattled through tunnels that smelled like brake dust and urban desperation, packed with people who looked as tired as Diane felt. Terrence watched his mother lean against the pole, her eyes closed, her face showing every one of her 52 years. She was still wearing her uniform, the pristine white shirt and black slacks that Malcolm insisted on, that she hand-washed every night because dry cleaning was too expensive. The outfit that made her invisible in rooms full of people who mattered. He thought about the safe, the bearer bonds inside, stacked like promises that might be lies. $200 million. An amount of money so large it stopped meaning anything. Just numbers, abstract and unreal. But those numbers represented something concrete. Years of his mother not having to scrub toilets, of medical care that didn't come with payment plans, of sleep that wasn't interrupted by anxiety about next month's rent. If Malcolm honored the deal, if his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Terrence's stomach dropped as he answered. Mr. Foster? A woman's voice, professional and clipped. Yes. This is Jennifer Walsh from Berkman and Associates. We're a law firm representing Mr. Malcolm Hendricks. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. Hendricks is disputing the validity of today's verbal agreement and will be pursuing legal action if you attempt to claim any assets from his personal safe. We'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss settlement options. Settlement. Terrence kept his voice even. He made an offer in front of a dozen witnesses. I fulfilled the terms. There's nothing to settle. A pause. Papers shuffling. Mr. Foster, I understand this may seem straightforward to you, but verbal contracts regarding large sums have significant legal complexity. Mr. Hendricks is prepared to offer you $50,000 as a goodwill gesture, provided you sign a non-disclosure agreement and waive all future claims. $50,000. Terrence almost laughed. He promised $200 million in front of witnesses, several of whom recorded it. Recordings made without consent in a private residence may not be admissible, Mr. Foster, and witnesses can be unreliable. Memory is a fragile thing. Mr. Hendricks has substantial resources to pursue this matter for as long as necessary. The settlement offer is generous, all things considered. I'd encourage you to think carefully about your options. The threat was delivered in the pleasant tone of someone ordering coffee. Terrence felt his jaw tighten. Tell Mr. Hendricks I'll be retaining my own counsel, and that his offer is insulting. Mr. Foster. He hung up. His hand was shaking. Diane had opened her eyes during the conversation. That was his lawyer. First volley, Terrence said. $50,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. $50,000 would change our lives, Diane said quietly. Mama, I know. But baby, think about it. $50,000. That's real. $200 million is a fantasy that's going to cost us everything trying to reach it. Maybe we take the money and let him win? Terrence looked at her. Let him humiliate you in front of his friends. Use me as entertainment. Then pay us to pretend it never happened? That's not a settlement, Mama. That's him buying our silence, so he can keep his dignity while we go back to being invisible. The train screeched to a halt. Their stop. They exited into familiar poverty, graffitied walls, broken pavement, the particular smell of neighborhoods that the city had given up on. 3 blocks to their apartment building, a walk Diane had made thousands of times with her shoulders curved under the weight of invisible burdens. But today she walked different, straighter, like something had shifted in her spine. You really think we can win this? She asked as they climbed the stairs. Elevator had been broken for 6 months. Landlord kept promising to fix it next week. Next week turning into a permanent state of neglect. I think Malcolm made a mistake, Terrence said. He thought I'd fail because he needed me to fail. His whole worldview requires people like us to stay in our place. But he said it, Mama, in front of everyone. And now his pride won't let him admit he lost to someone he considers beneath him. That's leverage. They reached their apartment. 1 bedroom, peeling wallpaper, a kitchen the size of a closet. Home. For now. Diane sat on the couch that Terrence slept on every night, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. I'm scared. Me too, Terrence said. But I'm also tired, Mama. Tired of watching you disappear. Tired of men like Malcolm treating people like furniture. Tired of being invisible in a world that only sees us when it needs someone to blame. He sat beside her. So yeah, I'm scared. But I'm also done. And maybe that's enough. Diane leaned her head on her son's shoulder, and for the first time in 15 years, she let herself imagine what winning might feel like. Outside, the city continued its indifferent dance. Somewhere in a penthouse made of glass and ego, Malcolm Hendricks was making calls, assembling his forces, preparing for war. The game had begun. The law office of Margaret Shun occupied the 3rd floor of a building in downtown Manhattan that had seen better decades. The elevator made concerning noises. The hallway carpet was the color of giving up. But when Terrence had searched for civil litigation attorney pro bono New York, her name had appeared with enough positive reviews to suggest competence, and enough mentions of fights for the underdog to suggest she might actually give a damn. He'd called yesterday. explained the situation in broad strokes. Billionaire, challenge, open safe, $200 million, already getting threatening legal calls. Expected to be laughed off the phone or quoted a retainer fee that would require selling organs. Instead, Margaret Chin had said 4 words that made Terrence's chest loosen for the first time in 24 hours. Come in tomorrow morning. Now, he sat in her waiting room. Really just a converted corner with 3 chairs and a dying plant. Try not to think about the 12 missed calls from unknown numbers on his phone. Malcolm's lawyers were persistent. He'd give him that. Mr. Foster? A woman appeared in the doorway. Early 40s, Korean-American, wearing a suit that looked expensive until you noticed the frayed cuffs. Her hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and her eyes held the particular sharpness of someone who'd learned to spot bullshit from a considerable distance. Terrence stood. Ms. Chun, thank you for seeing me. Call me Margaret. She gestured him into her office, small, cluttered with file boxes and law books that looked actually used rather than decorative. And thank you for bringing me the most interesting case I've seen in 6 months. Want coffee? It's terrible, but it's free. I'm okay, thanks. She poured herself a cup from a machine that looked older than Terrence, then settled behind her desk. So, you embarrassed a billionaire, and now he's trying to make you disappear. That about right? Pretty much. Good. I hate billionaires. She smiled, sharp, predatory. Tell me everything. Don't leave out details, even if they seem unimportant. Devil's in the details, and devils are my specialty. Terrence talked, told her about his mother's 15 years of service, about the brunch, about Malcolm's casual cruelty delivered like entertainment, about the challenge, the witnesses, the safe opening like a promise the universe had decided to keep, about the lawyer's call offering $50,000 to make it all go away. Margaret listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad. When Terrence finished, she sat back and steepled her fingers. Okay, let's talk reality. The bad news first. Terrence braced himself. Verbal contracts are legally binding in New York, but they're a nightmare to enforce, especially regarding large sums. Malcolm's lawyers will argue it was a joke, a hypothetical, not a serious offer. They'll bring in linguistics experts to parse his exact wording. They'll argue that no reasonable person would believe someone was giving away $200 million based on a parlor trick. They'll bury us in motions and depositions and procedural delays until you're old enough to collect Social Security. She paused. Also, you're black, he's white, you're poor, he's obscenely rich, and the American legal system has never been particularly interested in protecting people who look like you for people who look like him. That's not defeatism. That's pattern recognition. Terrence's stomach sank. So, I should take the $50,000. I didn't say that. Margaret's smile returned. I said that's the bad news. Want to hear the good news? Desperately. Malcolm Hendricks is a malignant narcissist who built his entire identity on being smarter than everyone else. He issued that challenge because he needed to feel superior, and he did it in front of witnesses because public validation is oxygen to men like him. But that means his ego won't let him simply pay you to go away. It'll eat at him. He'll want to win, to prove you didn't really beat him. She pulled out her phone, scrolled, turned it to show Terrence. A social media post from one of the brunch guests, the woman in pearls, posted 6 hours ago. Asterisk, witness the most extraordinary thing today. Sometimes the underestimated surprise you. Sometimes karma has impeccable timing. Hashtag speechless, asterisk. 3,000 likes. Hundreds of comments. The algorithm had grabbed it and run. It's already out there, Margaret said. The story's loose. Not the details yet, but the shape of it. And Malcolm's worst nightmare isn't losing $200 million. It's looking like he lost. Like someone he considered beneath him outsmarted him. That's the leverage. Terrence leaned forward. How do we use it? We don't settle quietly. We make noise. We file a lawsuit for the full amount, citing multiple witnesses and photographic evidence. We make it public. We turn this into a story about a billionaire who humiliates his employees for fun, then refuses to honor his word when called on it. We make him choose between his money and his reputation. Won't that just make him angrier? My mother's terrified he'll retaliate, get her blacklisted. Oh, he'll try. But retaliation against an employee whose son sued him? That's a separate lawsuit. Wrongful termination, hostile work environment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. We build a wall of legal consequences around your mother so thick that touching her costs him more than paying you. Margaret set down her coffee. Here's the thing, Terrence. Men like Malcolm operate on impunity. They've never faced real consequences, so they've forgotten consequences exist. But the game has changed. Social media, viral stories, public pressure. Those are tools the powerless didn't have 20 years ago. We can make this expensive for him in ways that have nothing to do with money. What's your fee? Terrence asked. Because I can't afford. Contingency. 33% if we win. Nothing if we lose. That's a huge risk for you. Margaret laughed. Terrence, I've been practicing law for 16 years. I made plenty of rich people richer. Help corporations dodge consequences. Build hours that could have fed families. I'm good at my job, and my job has slowly been killing the part of me that wanted to do this work in the first place. So yeah, it's a risk. But maybe I need to remember what it feels like to fight for someone who actually deserves it. She extended her hand. What do you say? Want to sue a billionaire? Terrence looked at her hand. Thought about his mother's face yesterday, the terror and exhaustion. Thought about 15 years of swallowed humiliation. Thought about Malcolm's smirk, so confident it had its own gravitational field. He shook Margaret's hand. Let's do it. Excellent. I'll draft the complaint today. We'll file tomorrow. And Terrence? Once we do this, there's no going back. Malcolm will come at you with everything he's got. Your life will be examined. Every mistake, every failure, every parking ticket will be used to paint you as undeserving. Are you ready for that? Terrence thought about dropping out of MIT because the money had run out and his mother needed help. Thought about 2 years of brilliant potential folded into freelance coding work that paid in insults. Thought about being invisible in a world that only saw him when it needed someone to blame. I've been ready my whole life, he said. I just didn't know it. Malcolm Hendricks threw his phone across his office hard enough to crack the screen. His 5th phone this month. He'd need to have his assistant order another. Unacceptable, he said to the 3 lawyers arrayed before him like soldiers awaiting orders. We offered him $50,000. $50,000. That's more money than his mother makes in 2 years. What more does he want? Jennifer Walsh, senior partner at Berkman & Associates, maintained her professional composure with visible effort. Mr. Hendricks, the young man appears to believe he's entitled to the full amount based on your verbal offer. It wasn't an offer. It was a joke, a hypothetical. Several witnesses seemed to have interpreted it as sincere. Malcolm's face went red. Then the witnesses are idiots. I want them contacted, reminded of their ongoing business relationships with my various enterprises. I want statements recanting their initial interpretations. Sir, that could be construed as witness tampering. I don't care what it's construed as. I want this problem eliminated. Do you understand? That safe-cracking dropout doesn't get to embarrass me and walk away with my money. Jennifer exchanged glances with her colleagues. We could pursue a more aggressive settlement. 100,000, perhaps. No. Malcolm's voice went quiet. Dangerous. Not $1 more. In fact, new strategy. We go after him. Fraud. Hacking. He accessed proprietary manufacturer codes. That's computer crimes. We prosecute him criminally. Threaten him with federal prison. See how clever he feels then. Mr. Hendricks, that's a significant escalation. I'm paying you $3,000 an hour to win, not to second-guess me. Make it happen. The lawyers filed out, leaving Malcolm alone in his glass tower. He walked to the safe, still open, still mocking him with its accessible interior. $200 million sitting there like a monument to his own stupidity. He'd close it again, change the codes, pretend yesterday never happened. But the internet wouldn't let him forget. Already the story was leaking, spreading like infection through social media. Anonymous accounts posting details, speculation, the delicious schadenfreude of watching someone powerful brought low. Malcolm's phone, the cracked one he'd thrown, buzzed with a notification. An email from Margaret Shun, attorney at law. He opened it. Read the attached legal complaint. Felt his blood pressure spike into dangerous territory. Terrence Foster was suing him for the full 200 million. And apparently, he'd just declared war. The story broke on a Wednesday. Terrence woke up to his phone vibrating like it was having a seizure. 17 missed calls. 43 text messages. His email inbox had exploded overnight with requests from journalists, bloggers, podcasters, and at least 3 people claiming to be documentary filmmakers. He sat up on the couch, his bed, his office, his entire personal space compressed into 6 feet of sagging cushions, and scrolled through the notifications with growing disbelief. Someone had leaked the lawsuit. Not just leaked it, weaponized it. The complaint Margaret had filed yesterday was now circulating on Twitter, Reddit, and every social media platform that trafficked in stories about rich people getting what they deserved. The hashtag #SafeGate was trending. "Mama," Terrence called out. "You awake?" Diane emerged from the bedroom, already dressed in her uniform, her face showing the particular exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept but had spent 8 hours pretending to try. "I got a call," she said quietly. "From building security. They're not letting me up to the penthouse today. Said Mr. Hendricks is working from home and doesn't require housekeeping services. He's freezing you out. He's firing me without firing me. If I don't work, I don't get paid. If I push back, he'll find a reason to terminate me officially. Either way, Her voice cracked. "I'm done, baby. 15 years, and I'm done." Terrence stood, went to her, wrapped his arms around shoulders that had carried too much for too long. "Margaret said this might happen. We document it. It's retaliation, and it builds our case." "Our case?" Diane laughed, broken and sharp. "We're fighting a billionaire with a third-floor lawyer in a building with a broken elevator. What case do we really have?" Before Terrence could answer, his phone rang again. "Margaret, Chun." He answered on speaker. "Have you seen the internet this morning?" Margaret's voice carried barely suppressed excitement. "Hard to miss it. Good, because we're about to use it. I've got 3 major news outlets wanting interviews. The New York Times is running a piece tomorrow about wealth inequality and public challenges. Someone started a GoFundMe for your legal fees that's already raised $40,000. Terrence, this story has legs. It's everything people are angry about compressed into one perfect narrative." Diane was shaking her head. "This is going to make him angrier. You don't understand. Men like Malcolm don't lose gracefully. They burn everything down. Then let him burn," Margaret said, "in public, where everyone can see. Mrs. Foster, I know you're scared, but your son just became the face of everyone who's ever been humiliated by their boss and couldn't fight back. That's power. We need to use it." "How?" Terrence asked. "Press conference. Today. We control the narrative before Malcolm's PR team can spin it. We tell the story, all of it. The 15 years of service, the public humiliation, the challenge, everything. We make this about more than money. We make it about dignity." Terrence looked at his mother. She was crying silently, tears running down her face like they'd been waiting years for permission to fall. "Mama, what do you want to do?" Diane wiped her eyes, straightened her spine, and for the first time in 15 years, she looked like someone who'd remembered what anger felt like. "I want to tell the truth," she said. "I want everyone to know exactly who Malcolm Hendricks is when nobody's watching." The press conference took place at Margaret's office at 2 p.m. She'd rented a conference room in the building next door, larger space, better lighting, fewer dying plants. By the time Terrence and Diane arrived, journalists packed the room like sardines with press credentials. Terrence had never seen so many cameras pointed at him, never felt the weight of that many eyes, all hungry for his story, for his pain, for whatever piece of him he was willing to sacrifice for their content. Margaret stood at the podium, professional and fierce. "Thank you all for coming. I'm Margaret Chun, representing Terrence Foster and his mother, Diane Foster, in their lawsuit against Malcolm Hendricks. My clients will make brief statements, then we'll take limited questions." She stepped aside. Terrence moved to the microphone, acutely aware of his thrift store button-down shirt, his discount haircut, every marker of poverty that these cameras would capture and dissect. "My name is Terrence Foster," he began, his voice steadier than he felt. 3 days ago, I was invited to my mother's workplace and publicly humiliated for entertainment. Her employer, Malcolm Hendricks, issued a challenge in front of a dozen witnesses. Open his safe, and $200 million would be mine. He did this because he assumed I would fail. Because in his worldview, people like me, poor, black, without the right pedigree, exist to confirm his superiority. The room was silent. Cameras clicked like insects. I opened the safe. I fulfilled the terms of his challenge exactly as stated. And now Mr. Hendricks is refusing to honor his word because honoring it would mean admitting that he was wrong. That intelligence and worth aren't determined by bank accounts. That the son of his maid might actually be smarter than him. He paused. This lawsuit isn't just about money. It's about every person who's been treated as invisible. Every worker who's swallowed humiliation because they need the paycheck. Every kid who dropped out of school because the system values wealth over potential. We're here because someone needs to say enough. He stepped back. Diane moved forward, and Terrence saw her hands shaking as she gripped the podium. "My name is Diane Foster," she said quietly. "I've worked for Malcolm Hendricks for 15 years. I've scrubbed his toilets, served his guests, made myself invisible because that's what the job required. I watch him treat people like furniture, useful until they're not, disposable when they stop serving his needs." Her voice grew stronger. 3 days ago, he used my son as entertainment. Made him perform like a trained animal for the amusement of people who've never had to choose between electricity and groceries. And when my son succeeded, when he did exactly what Mr. Hendricks challenged him to do, suddenly the rules changed. Suddenly, it was a joke. A hypothetical. Not real. She looked directly into the nearest camera. But it was real when he wanted to humiliate us. It was real when everyone was laughing. It only became fake when we won. That tells you everything you need to know about how men like Malcolm Hendricks see people like us. The questions erupted like fireworks. What do you say to people who think 200 million is excessive? Has Mr. Hendricks attempted to contact you directly? Are you worried about retaliation? Margaret fielded most of them with lawyerly precision, deflecting anything that could damage the case. But one question cut through, directed at Terrence. "What will you do with $200 million if you win?" Terrence paused, hadn't let himself think that far ahead. Winning still felt theoretical, like touching the moon. "I'd finish my degree," he said finally, "help my mother retire with dignity, and maybe start a scholarship fund for kids who have to drop out because the money runs dry. Kids who deserve better than what they got dealt." Malcolm watched the press conference on his office television, his knuckles white around a glass of scotch he'd poured at noon and hadn't touched. "They're making you the villain," his PR consultant said unnecessarily. Rebecca Stone had managed crises for 3 senators and 2 Fortune 500 CEOs, and she looked at Malcolm now with the expression of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "The optics are terrible. Rich white billionaire refuses to pay poor black family." It's every social justice narrative compressed into one story. I don't care about narratives. I care about facts. The fact is, it was a joke, not legally binding. The court of public opinion doesn't care about legally binding. They care about the story. And right now, the story is David versus Goliath, except Goliath is refusing to accept he got hit with the rock. Malcolm drained his scotch. "What do you recommend?" "Settle. Publicly. Turn it into a charitable gesture. Offer the full amount. Spin it as you being impressed by his ingenuity. Say you're supporting education and opportunity. Take the win that's available." "Absolutely not." "Malcolm." I said no. His voice could have frozen water. "I don't reward extortion. I don't validate theft. That little punk hacked my safe using stolen manufacturer codes. And now he's playing victim? I'll see him in prison before I give him $1. Rebecca stood. "Then you're going to lose more than money. Your reputation, your business relationships, possibly your board position at 3 companies that are suddenly very concerned about association with negative publicity. But it's your funeral." She left. Malcolm sat alone in his office, surrounded by glass and steel and a magnificent view of a city that suddenly felt like it was laughing at him. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You made us invisible for 15 years. Now the whole world is watching. How does it feel?" Malcolm threw his phone again. This time it shattered into expensive pieces, just like everything else he'd built on the assumption that money made him untouchable. Outside, the sun set over Manhattan, indifferent to billionaires and Maid's sons alike. The war had just begun. The trial was set for 6 weeks out, but the real battle happened in the space between, in public opinion, in social media threads, in 1,000 small ways that power tries to reassert itself when challenged. Malcolm's legal team filed motion after motion. Attempts to dismiss. Attempts to move the case to private arbitration. Attempts to seal the proceedings from public view. Margaret Chin fought each one with the tenacity of someone who'd finally found a fight worth having. And Judge Patricia Rodriguez, a 60-year-old Bronx native who'd worked her way through law school as a waitress, denied them all with barely concealed satisfaction. Mr. Hendricks issued a public challenge, she'd said during one hearing, peering over her glasses at Malcolm's lead attorney. He doesn't get to suddenly demand privacy when the results displease him. Motion denied. But Malcolm had other weapons. Terrence's life became an archaeological dig. Every layer of his past excavated and examined for anything that could be used against him. A Reddit post from 4 years ago where he'd made an edgy joke about hacking. A college disciplinary hearing for accessing the university's network without authorization. Charges that had been dismissed when it turned out he'd been helping IT fix a security flaw. A photograph from high school showing him at a party where someone in the background was holding what might have been marijuana. The tabloids ran with it all. MIT dropouts, troubled past. Was the safe challenge really a con? Inside Terrence Foster's secret life. Diane stopped reading the news after the third article described her as a domestic worker who may have been complicit in her son's scheme to defraud her employer. The words made her physically ill, sent her to the bathroom to vomit up the anxiety that had been building in her stomach like toxic waste. "They're destroying us," she told Terrence one night, her voice hollow. "Every day there's something new. People I haven't talked to in 20 years selling stories about me. My own cousin told a reporter I was always jealous of successful people." Terrence sat beside her on the couch, exhausted in ways sleep couldn't fix. The GoFundMe had reached $200,000, which should have felt like victory, but mostly felt like pressure. All those strangers investing in their story, expecting a Hollywood ending that real life rarely delivered. "Margaret says it's desperation," he said. "Malcolm's trying to make us quit before we get to trial. Maybe we should." "Mama, I'm serious, baby. Look at what this is costing us. Your name is mud. Nobody will hire me. We're living off charity and hope. Maybe $50,000, and our dignity is better than this." Terrence looked at his mother, really looked at her, saw the woman who'd raised him alone after his father died, who'd worked doubles and triples to keep him in school, who'd made herself invisible for 15 years so that he could have a chance at being seen. "We're not quitting," he said quietly. "Not because of the money. Because men like Malcolm need to learn that they can't just humiliate people and walk away. That power has limits. That sometimes the invisible fight back." Diane's eyes filled with tears. "When did you get so stubborn?" "I learned from you," Terrence said. "You just called it survival instead." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus Webb had been Malcolm's personal IT consultant for 7 years. The man who'd installed the safe, configured the security systems, and maintained the network of surveillance and protection that wealthy paranoia required. He was white, 40-something, and possessed the particular moral flexibility of someone who'd spent his career helping rich people hide things. He walked into Margaret Chin's office on a Tuesday morning without an appointment, carrying a laptop and an expression that suggested he hadn't slept in days. "I have something you need to see," he told Margaret. What he had was a recording. Video footage from Malcolm's office security system, time-stamped the day of the brunch. Malcolm had ordered the files deleted, but Marcus had kept a backup. Insurance, he called it, against the day Malcolm decided to make him a scapegoat. Margaret, Terrence, and Diane watched the footage in stunned silence. The video showed everything. Malcolm's cruel performance, the guests' uncomfortable laughter, Diane's face, carefully blank, professionally invisible. And then, most importantly, the moment before Terrence arrived. Malcolm, slightly drunk, leaning toward his guests and saying, "This is going to be hilarious. I'm dead serious about the offer, though. If the kid actually opens it, which he won't, the money's his. I've got a dozen of you as witnesses. Legally binding, right? He laughed. Not that it matters. The safe is impossible. Margaret replayed it 3 times. This is admissible? Marcus nodded. It's his security system. His property. One-party consent state. He recorded himself. Why are you doing this? Terrence asked. Why help us? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Because I've watched Malcolm destroy people for sport for 7 years. I've helped him do it, secured his systems, covered his tracks, made myself complicit because the money was good and I told myself it wasn't my problem. But watching what he's doing to you too, I've got a son your age, Terrence. Dropped out of college too, different reasons. I look at you and I see him, and I look at Malcolm and I see. He trailed off. I see someone who needs to lose for once. Margaret smiled, sharp and predatory. Mr. Webb, how would you like to be a witness? The settlement offer came 48 hours before trial. Jennifer Walsh delivered it personally to Margaret's office, accompanied by 2 other attorneys and the demeanor of someone who'd stopped enjoying her job. $75 million, she said without preamble. Full amount, no admission of wrongdoing, mutual non-disclosure agreement. It's on the table for 24 hours. Margaret didn't blink. We want 150. Half the bonds. Public admission that the challenge was legitimate. And no NDA. That's not. That's the offer. Your client screwed up. He issued a challenge. It was recorded. He confirmed it was legally binding on his own security footage that he forgot he was keeping. You go to trial. He loses everything and looks like a vindictive bully in the process. We settle now. He gets to spin it as recognizing ingenuity. Jennifer looked at Terrence and Diane. This is still a substantial risk for you. Trials are unpredictable. Juries can be. We're not afraid of a jury, Terrence said. We're afraid of accepting scraps when we earn the whole meal. Jennifer left. Came back 6 hours later with a counteroffer. $100 million. Public statement acknowledging the challenge was sincere, limited NDA covering only personal details unrelated to the case. Margaret looked at her clients. It's a good offer. Better than I expected to get. But it's your call. Diane looked at her son. Terrence looked at his mother. An entire conversation happened in that silence. 15 years of swallowed humiliation, 3 weeks of public warfare, and the question of whether revenge was worth more than security. We want the full amount, Diane said quietly. Not because we're greedy, because that's what he promised. Because keeping your word should mean something, even for billionaires. The trial lasted 3 days. Malcolm's attorneys argued that the challenge was hypothetical, that no reasonable person would believe such an offer was genuine, that Terrence had essentially hacked the safe using proprietary codes he had no authorization to access. Margaret Chin systematically destroyed each argument. She played the security footage, Malcolm's own words confirming the offer was legally binding. She brought in the brunch guests, several of whom testified under oath that they'd understood the challenge to be genuine. She presented expert testimony that the manufacturer's diagnostic codes were publicly available and that using them didn't constitute hacking. And then she put Diane on the stand. Mrs. Foster, can you describe your typical workday for Mr. Hendricks? Diane's voice was steady, quiet, and devastating. She described 15 years of casual cruelty. The way Malcolm would summon her to his office just to criticize her work, even when it was flawless. The time he'd docked her pay because she called in sick when she had pneumonia. The constant reminders that she was replaceable, invisible, tolerated only as long as she remained useful. Did you ever feel valued? Margaret asked. No, Diane said simply. I felt like furniture that could be blamed when things went wrong. The jury, 7 women, 5 men, mixed races and ages, listened with expressions that ranged from sympathy to barely concealed anger. Malcolm took the stand in his own defense, which his lawyers had advised against but his ego had insisted upon. He was polished, articulate. He explained that the challenge had been entertainment, that sophisticated people understood the difference between serious offers and performative gestures, that he'd been the victim of an opportunistic scheme by people looking for a payday. Then Margaret Chun cross-examined him. Mr. Hendricks, on the security footage, you stated the offer was legally binding. What did you mean by that? It was a joke. Context matters. But you said it before the challenge, not after. You confirmed to your guests that the offer was genuine. Were you lying to them? Malcolm's jaw tightened. I was playing along with the moment. Playing along with the moment, or genuinely issuing a challenge you believed no one could meet? The safe was designed to be impossible to crack. But it wasn't impossible, was it, Mr. Hendricks? Your employee's son opened it in under 60 seconds. And rather than honor your word, you immediately began working to deny him what you'd promised. Not because the offer wasn't real, but because you never expected to have to pay. Isn't that the truth? I don't appreciate your tone. This isn't about appreciation, Mr. Hendricks. This is about whether you're a man who keeps his word, or a man who only honors promises when they cost him nothing. The courtroom went silent. Malcolm's face had gone red, his hands gripping the witness stand like he wanted to break it. I built an empire, he said, his voice tight with rage. I earned every dollar through intelligence and hard work. I don't owe anything to people who want to take what I've built. No one's taking anything, Margaret interrupted. They're asking you to honor a promise you made in front of witnesses. That's not theft, Mr. Hendricks. That's consequences. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman, a black woman in her 50s who reminded Terrence of his mother, read the verdict with a voice that carried to every corner of the courtroom. In the matter of Foster versus Hendricks, we find in favor of the plaintiffs. We award the full amount of $200 million in bearer bonds, plus an additional $15 million in punitive damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress, plus legal fees. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Malcolm sat frozen, his face the color of old snow. Terrence felt his mother's hand find his, squeezed tight enough to hurt, tight enough to confirm this was real. We also recommend, the forewoman continued, that the court consider sanctions against the defendant for witness intimidation and attempted evidence tampering, based on testimony provided during trial. Judge Rodriguez banged her gavel. So ordered. Mr. Hendricks, you have 30 days to transfer the awarded assets. This court is adjourned. Malcolm Hendricks wrote the check, actually transferred the bearer bonds to an escrow account Margaret had established 28 days later. He did it without comment, without press release, without any of the performative grace he'd built his public image on. 3 weeks after that, his board of directors requested his resignation from 2 companies. 6 months later, he'd sold his penthouse and moved to the Cayman Islands, where extradition treaties were suggestions and wealthy men could pretend consequences didn't exist. Terrence never saw him again. 2 years later, Terrence walked across a stage at MIT and accepted his diploma, finished degree, full scholarship funded by the foundation he'd established with a portion of his settlement. The Diane Foster Scholarship Fund provided full tuition, room, and board for students who'd had to leave school for financial reasons. Diane sat in the audience, wearing a dress she'd bought without checking the price tag, crying the way mothers cry when their children become proof that the world can be different than it was. After the ceremony, they stood together outside the auditorium, watching graduates celebrate with families, futures spreading before them like maps to territories that might actually be worth reaching. "You did it, baby," Diane said. "We did it," Terrence corrected. "You carried me here." She smiled, reached up to straighten his graduation cap. "So what now? You're a millionaire with a degree and the world's most viral origin story. What does Terrence Foster do next?" He thought about it. About the safe that had opened, because he'd paid attention. About 15 years of his mother being invisible. About a billionaire who'd learned, too late, that cruelty eventually compounds into consequences. "I think," he said slowly, "I built something that makes sure people like Malcolm Hendricks can't treat people like us as invisible anymore. Maybe a tech company that prioritizes workers over profits. Maybe a platform that exposes labor abuses. Maybe I just finished becoming the person you raised me to be." Diane took his hand. "That sounds perfect." They walked together through the MIT campus, mother and son, no longer invisible, no longer powerless, carrying between them the weight of $200 million and the certainty that sometimes, not often, but sometimes, the world bends toward justice. Behind them, The safe sat in an evidence locker somewhere, a $500,000 reminder that the most expensive security in the world couldn't protect you from your own arrogance. And in the Cayman Islands, Malcolm Hendricks poured another scotch and told himself he'd been the victim, because accepting responsibility would require becoming someone he'd spent 63 years refusing to be. The city moved on. The story faded from headlines. But Diane Foster retired with dignity, and her son changed the world in small, persistent ways, and somewhere a billionaire learned that humiliation feels different when you're the one expected to swallow it. Sometimes the invisible are simply waiting for you to blink. And when you do, they take everything.